Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host Sana Maqbool with you at PTV World. In today's show, we'll be talking about two very important stories. The first is with reference to what is going on within the country. And for some reason, we've also seen that there has been a lot of issues that are being discussed. And it's quite important to the country's future as well. The economic and the political situation of the country both have been the talk of the town. And unfortunately, we've seen a lot of instability and a lot of crisis both at the economic front and the political front as well, and the economic challenges keep on increasing as well. We've also seen a rise in fuel prices and electricity prices, and that of course is important in terms of the IMF bailout package. But what needs to be done in order to look at the economy in a more positive trajectory in the coming days to come, that of course still remains to be seen. The challenges still continue, and the kind of measures that the government needs to take in this regard there is much that remains to be seen on that front as well. We've also seen that there has been a lot of talk with regards to what Pakistan needs to be doing and what the measures the government needs to be taking, many of which revolve around increasing exports or increasing foreign direct investment or taking other serious and difficult decisions for the future of the economy. So we will be discussing those in detail and then trying to understand how the current scenario will play out in the coming days to come. And we'll also be taking a look at the political future of the country and how that's going to impact the economic situation. In our second segment of the show, we'll be looking at what is happening in India. There has been, of course, a lot of deterioration in the way that the political leaders, people of influence within India, talk about the religion and faiths of different populations, including Muslims. And we've also seen that recently there has been quite insulting comments that have been made by BJP leaders. And this, of course, is something that has created a lot of ruckus in the Muslim world. It has been totally unacceptable, the kind of blasphemous remarks that have been made against the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, and something that has seen the kind of backlash that it should from the Arab world as well. There has been an online campaign that has started to boycott the Indian products, which of course is a consequence of the sentiment that is hurt of the Muslim population. We've also seen that a strong demarche has also been issued by Pakistan. It has been condemned by the Prime Minister and the Pakistan Armed Forces as well, and the National Assembly has also passed a resolution condemning this. But what remains to be seen, of course, is how this is going to impact the way that future political leaders or the way that the hate speech that has continued to grip India, whether or not that is going to continue. We've seen a reaction that has come from the BJP, who's sort of taken a back seat and taken their hands off from this and said that this is not what the party believes and it's not in line with the party's ideology. But again, we've seen that the BJP and its Hindutva ideology and the way that they have treated not just the Muslim population but different minorities as well begs otherwise. So we'll be taking a closer look at what really needs to be done and how perhaps the response from the Arab world and the Muslim countries should increase or should also be existing for other human rights violations and acts of discrimination that continue to happen within India. For this and more, I've been joined in the studios, as always, by Farrukh Pitafi and Raja Faisal. And for our first segment of the show today, we've also been joined by Dr. Mohammed Zubair Khan, who's a former Minister of Commerce. Thank you very much, Mr. Zubair, for joining us and being a part of the debate. I'll start with you, sir. Of course, we've seen a lot of economic challenges and a lot of political challenges as well in the recent days and months. And now we've also seen a hike in fuel prices. We've also seen a hike in electricity prices, and something that perhaps the general public in Pakistan, of course, is finding it difficult to come to terms with. How would you be able to assess the situation for our audience and try and analyze it in what really was or is necessary for the country to be able to have its economy on track?
So
Mr. Zubair, can you please unmute yourself because we're unable to hear you?
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, Mr. Zubair, can you say something, please? I think we still are not able to establish a connection. Sir, can you hear me? Dr. Zubair, are you with us? Unfortunately, we are still trying to get in touch with him. So we'll get back to you, and hopefully we'll be able to hear more from Dr. Zubair later on in the show. But Farrukh, same question to you if you take that and right. Try and help our audience to understand what really is going on at the economic front.
Right, Sana, the reason we are talking this right now is that usually we say that Pakistan's businessmen don't take interest in national causes, and they don't actually volunteer their opinion, right? So Mia Mancha actually is a billionaire. He is very influential. He gave an interview in which he came up with various suggestions which are very important. One, that don't actually focus or get obsessed about fiscal belt tightening. What we have to focus on right now, we have to cooperate with the IMF, but eventually Pakistan should be focusing on growth. If growth continues, the countries, for example, the US is highly indebted. 10 other countries are very indebted, but they keep on investing in growth, and their growth has overtaken their borrowing, and that's why they are very effective. There were other things as well regarding overall situation. He was very optimistic, but he also said that Pakistan will have to comply with the tough demands of IMF. So that is the basic backdrop of this entire story that we are going to discuss. You asked about my opinion. Let me volunteer that at this moment we are on the right track, but what happens is that while we make policy here in Islamabad, it is thought to be good, effective, and it is going to salvage the economy. When it comes to the common man on the street, he doesn't understand it, and because of the mounting pressures on the working class, that becomes a problem.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And Faisal, when we look at what Mancha Saab has also added in the interview, he's of course said a lot of things which may be perhaps difficult at the political front as well. He's talked about looking at different ways, looking at different reforms that may be essential, and has said that perhaps is not that high a cost to pay when we look at the economic situation. He's also talked about opening doors to different countries, including India as well. And I want to talk about that more in detail in the show as well. But just for now, when we look at how the current coalition government actually perhaps is beneficial in terms of being able to make these tough decisions, according to Mancha Saab, how do you see the statement, and whether or not do you think that the kind of reforms that are needed can actually happen? Will the government be able to take that step?
Sana, I think government must take them, and I agree with Mancha Saab when he says that Pakistan desperately, needs to enhance its economy. The growth should never stop. And secondly, he highlighted about the foreign direct investment, which I fully agree with. But there is a problem. There is a certain problem when we talk about the FDIs in Pakistan in recent decades. What we've been seeing is the money was pouring in shape of FDIs, but in the wrong direction. Why I say wrong direction? Because real estate, it has been booming, but at the same time there were certain elements within the real estate who's been creating lots of problems for the overseas Pakistanis, for people who were willing to invest in Pakistan in real estate. There were lots of problems, and that is why even that investment is shrinking now. So we really need to facilitate the investors. We really need to talk to the domestic investors who are actually investing outside of the country. They need to bring the money back.
Right.
Be they businessmen, be they
politicians,
former politicians, former generals as well. If they are into a business, they need to bring almost, if not half of the money back to the country, at least 20% or 30% of their wealth. It should be returned.
And that's a very interesting point, but we'll come to that later on.
Right. Dr. Zubair, I hope you can hear me now, and we are also able to hear you. Can you say something for me, please?
Okay. Yes, I'm glad that you people spoke first, because now I know what is the other opinion. I totally disagree with that. You see, Pakistan is already experiencing a growth of 6%, but are we not in the midst of a crisis of rising inflation, which no one wants to bear the burden of? Are we not in a crisis of foreign exchange? We are going bankrupt. There's a balance of payments crisis. We are desperately looking around for somebody to put their dollars in our foreign currency account. No, this is not how macroeconomics is run. If growth has to be balanced, we have to have a stable economy. In economics, when we say stable, it means that you have a fiscal situation which is sustainable in a sense that the debt to GDP ratio should not be continuously rising, number one. Number two, you've got to have an external position where the reserves are being built by rising reserves, which can only come through a very controlled current account deficit, which can easily be financed by foreign loans or loans from the international financial institutions at reasonable interest rates, so that the country can, and also, of course, we want foreign investment, but we want foreign investment in a way that does not receive such great incentives that they come to hang around our neck. And I'm referring here to the IPPs, for instance, the investment in the power sector. That is now beginning to cause the entire economy to collapse because the price of electricity is rising very, very rapidly. Now, so how do you achieve that? The way to achieve that is that domestic demand should not exceed domestic production by such a large extent. And because and what is the best reflection of that? It is reflected in the budget deficit. Now, the budget deficit is continuously running for the last 7-8 years or more at over 5%, 7-8%, and that has two implications. Number one, the current account deficit becomes large and our reserves are run out, and the dollar rises in value. And the other is that it creates additional M2, liquidity in the system, and that fuels inflation. Pakistan has two basic structural reasons why this is happening. One, that Pakistan's NFC award, done during the time of Shaukat Tareen's last Ministry of Finance, gave such a large chunk of federal resources to the provinces, about over 55%, that this was essentially the fiscal dismemberment of the federation. The federation must run deficits now to meet all its expenses and the high interest payments made to the commercial banks. And the other basic flaw is that the State Bank of Pakistan is using interest rates as an instrument of monetary policy to control inflation. If it were an effective instrument, first of all, there are reasons why it cannot be ever. But even as a practical tool, it's been used for the last 4-5 years at very high rates of interest. And still inflation is running rampant. So interest rates have no bearing. We have to control M2, the total liquidity in the system. And the main source for the growth of M2 is the large budget deficit. It is good to say that let us keep going
Dr. Saab, I'm glad that you are talking about structural imbalances and structural flaws.
Yes.
But I was a little bit intrigued that you actually spoke about an NFC award and you spoke about other things. But the fact that there are SOEs which are there and eating up so many resources, and the fact that there is circular debt that keeps on mounting because our energy sector is not that much efficient. Don't you think that they are also huge part of the problem?
Oh, yeah, there is. Absolutely, I agree with you. Look, there is no shortage of real serious issues all around us. The SOEs are continuously being subsidized, and we are paying from the budget deficit. In addition, you said the energy. I just mentioned the energy sector in the context of foreign investment. We invited foreign investment at terms which we cannot fulfill without ruining our own economy. So I would say that we have to sort of look at foreign investment very carefully. Now, when foreign investment comes in what we call the non-tradable sector, suppose they come and build roads for us, those foreign investments are earning in rupees, but they are taking their money out of the country in dollars. Now, look at the outflow of the profits and dividends of foreign investment of the last 2-3 years. It is $2 or $3 billion, but they are not earning dollars. I would like to say that we should bring in foreign investment in areas where they either earn dollars or they save us dollars. But they are not doing that.
And that is
Things like
again,
infrastructure.
again,
Hello?
Dr. Saab, it is heartening that you are talking about investment and
Of
how
course,
it
these
should
are
be
issues I've been
calibrated.
talking about for years.
As sir, as we move forward, we are going to talk about direction of investment as well. But at this moment, since you brought up fiscal deficit and how it keeps on mounting, let me ask you one thing that was highlighted by, Dr. Atif Mia, one of the world's prominent economists. He says that it doesn't happen in other countries, but in Pakistan, capital spending is actually calculated as a part of fiscal deficit. Why is it so?
Well, that is not a major item over there. I'm sorry. It is the method used in Pakistan. The IMF accounting system is standard throughout the world. I've worked at the IMF for 12 years, and I know, worked in Turkey, European countries. There is nothing unusual about the method of calculating the deficit. The point is that the high interest payments are a major portion of our the use of the fiscal resources. You know that interest payments last year consumed almost 70 to 80% of all taxes collected, and they're all going into the big commercial banks, Mr. Mansur's bank, Shaukat Tareen's bank. And there are vested interests. They've kept the interest rates high. Now, globally, after the 2008 financial crisis, when the world had to pump in a lot of money, the debts across the Western countries increased, they adopted very low interest rates. It's called financial repression. While our interest rates went in exactly the opposite direction. If you don't lower interest rates, Pakistan will be bankrupt even in domestic currency. Right now, we are having a financial crisis in dollar terms. But that it will shift even to the rupee.
Absolutely. Dr. Zubair, earlier you were talking about the kind of structural and fundamental changes and reforms that are required, and understandably so. But I want to understand what the government perhaps can do right now or take an urgent or immediate measure in order to put the economy on the right track. The measures that are currently being taken with regards to the IMF bailout packages or getting bailout packages from other countries also perhaps, is that something that you would recommend?
Look, I'll tell you one thing. I have worked at the IMF and I know how they think. They had a program with the PTI government in which there were certain projections of the budget deficit. Now, when energy prices increased globally, not for our fault or for their fault, but they went up because of the war in Ukraine. Now, what happened was that either you pass on the prices of the higher cost energy to the consumer, to the public and to the industry and businesses, or you subsidize it, but you must cut back expenditures elsewhere. I have been arguing to the PTI government and even the new one that for God's sake, that the amount of subsidy is so small compared to the total expenditures of the government. You know that total expenditures of the 5 governments together, of what we call the consolidated fiscal accounts, is 23% of GDP are used up by the government. They are consuming a fourth of the economy. They're in trillions of rupees. Trillions. What is a trillion? 1,000 billion. Now, don't tell me that you can't find a saving of 120 to 150 billion. 120 to 150 billion per month. In such a big expense, they are giving salary.
But Dr. Mifta, sir, but Dr. Mifta actually says that the total expenditure of government on salaries and non-developmental funding is basically 40 billion rupees. The rest goes to subsidies and other expenditures. You don't agree with that?
No. I have before me the accounts in the latest IMF report, which was published 3-4 months ago. Now, they give you the total amount. The total government expenditure, development and non-development, including interest payments alone, are a few trillion. And they are raised voluntarily by our own state bank. And to what purpose? They are not passing on, the banks are not passing on their high interest rates to depositors. The difference between the average deposit rate by the banking sector and the difference between that and the average lending rate of the banks, what we call the spread, interest rate spread, is the largest in Pakistan compared to the region or the developing world. These banks are raking it in. They are making billions and billions and billions. Now, Pakistan needs to stop all of it. We need to go back to direct monetary control. So we, instead of letting interest rates be determined in the market, you know what happened in the latest auction of the T-bills about maybe 4 or 5 days ago? Before that, in the auction, the banks came up at a very high interest rate. So the government raised, instead of lowering its policy rate, they raised it so as to try and bring the banks down to that level. This, in the new auction, they went yet higher to 15-16%. They are robbing this country's budget dry, absolutely dry. The rise of 1% in the auction rate, 1%, means an additional excuse me, let me just finish this point, very important. A rise of 1% in the auction rate raises the interest payments in the budget by 300 billion rupees. How can you justify this in a country where you are not able to, and let me tell you, on the energy prices, pass on.
Dr. Zubair, there is another issue which has been, highlighted and debated upon lots of time before as well. I wanted to raise that once more in front of you. It is about the agriculture and the smart planning for what we need to grow, because we are a country facing a scarce when it comes to water resource as well, and at the same time we are growing cotton, we are growing sugarcane, and we are importing wheat as well, and we are an agricultural country. Where do you think that the planning of the government needs to be improved, number one? And number two, we keep on hearing about SEZs, and plus there is a large coastal side of Pakistan which can be utilized the way Vietnam used its land to attract the foreign direct investment, to attract the multinational companies. Owing to the fact that we have Govt now, which is about to get start, shouldn't we be contacting with the multinational companies to attract them to make their own factories there, or industrialize that coastal side of Pakistan? Like recently we heard that Japan was interested in bringing Toyota in the coastal side of Pakistan, so that they can build their product there and they can simply push it into the seas by Govt.
Look, Japanese investment is always welcome, and I have always been very happy about the investment here. But let me say that, look at the automobile sector. They are the most protected sector of Pakistan. They have been producing cars here now for over almost 30 years, but they are not allowed. They are not allowed by the parent companies to export anything out of Pakistan. We've got every brand of major Japanese cars here. Why should we now expect them to come, and how can you expect that they will do anything different by investing near Govt? No, please tell them to first export cars out of their present factories and produce Japanese standard cars for Pakistan and make them competitive. They are making it in over there. But going back to agriculture you were talking about, I totally agree. Look, when Pakistan was born in 1947, what did we inherit? We did not inherit industry, but we inherited the world's largest mass irrigation network. That was the canal
All
network.
Right.
And
thank you very much, Dr. Zubair, for joining us and being a part of the debate. Unfortunately, that's all we had time for that segment. We'll take a short break and be right back. Welcome back to the debate. Before we took the break, we were talking about the economic challenges with Dr. Zubair, the former Minister of Commerce, and talking about the different measures that the government can take currently to take the economy on the right track. Farrukh, you wanted to add something?
Right. Earlier, when Dr. Saab was responding, he's perhaps actually confused the summary I was giving with my own opinion. Those are actually Manshah Saab's opinion. And I think whosoever actually follows his opinion, I think there are many billionaires in this country, but there are few who actually put their opinion out and make an effort. So I'd like him. But you see, the biggest problem at this moment, regardless whether it is Dr. Yusuf, whether it is Mia Mansha or anybody else, the time of advice has passed. Now, don't tell us what can be done, show us what can be done, right?
Absolutely.
And there are examples in the past as well. Earlier, Tareen Saab's example came up. My only point is that no matter what, he became part of the system and tried to actually solve the problems, right? So that is how you'll have to do it. Take responsibility, volunteer, and try to bring about some kind of change. Then we will see some change, because there are so many things that are happening in this country. And honestly, you and I didn't contribute to that.
Absolutely.
We are only journalists. These people have been calling shots. They should actually bring about the change.
Absolutely. That is the hope, and we hope we get to see that sooner rather than later. In our next segment, we'll be taking a look at what is going on in India, with particular focus on the recent statements that have been given against the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, by BJP leaders, and the way that the Arab world has reacted to it. For this, we've been joined online by Haitham Nasir, who is an Arabic journalist. Thank you very much, Haitham, for joining us and being a part of the debate. We've seen quite a bit of a backlash from the Arab world with regards to these statements. There have been a lot of condemnations pouring in. We've also seen that the Indian ambassadors have been called in different parts of the country and in different countries as well. And we also know that the public has also reacted strongly to this. There has been an online campaign calling for a boycott of Indian products. And this, of course, is a strong reaction to the statements that have been given. And of course, we realize that the Muslim sentiment has been heard. But do you think that when we talk about the kind of consequences that India needs to see in terms of the way that perhaps its leaders can get away with the kind of remarks that they make, the hate speech that is prevalent within India, is that something that perhaps can be tackled with by such boycotts or such condemnations, and not just come in the form of a triggering or a knee-jerk reaction to such statements as the BJP leaders did?
Thank you for having me. First of all, this is not the first time there was a reaction to an Indian statement, either by officials or by some, if we call them extremists in the BJP or other parties in India. But this is the first time the states are taking action, serious actions, by calling the ambassadors and issuing statements, and different ministers also from Middle East have spoken about this issue, which indicates that India did not get the hint in the previous incidents, and is maybe overestimating the tolerance of Arabic states, especially Gulf states, which India has a lot of trade and labor exporting and other goods exporting business with them. Beside also, of course, importing oil from those countries. So this time it's becoming a little more serious, but still it's too early to say that it will be affecting India relations with those countries to a great extent, or affecting India's business also. Why? Because in Arabic countries or in Islamic countries in general, there were some campaigns for boycotting French goods before a few years because of similar reasons. And before a few years also Danish. And whenever any country supports any statements that are considered to be disrespectful to any Islamic icon or the Prophet himself, such campaigns are started in Middle East in general, and specifically in Arabic countries. But those campaigns are not sustaining for a long time, and they don't get support from the state level.
Right.
Um,
But like you said, Mr. Haytham, this is not something that has happened for the first time as well. And if this is something that has happened in the past as well, or has the potential to reoccur in the future, considering the BJP, its ideology, and the way its political leaders behave and talk about things, then maybe a more serious or more tangible or sustainable, as you were talking about, action is needed from the Muslim community, is it not?
And secondly, while in the past there must be instances like this, we haven't seen Indian government actually going into this damage control mode. So something must be seriously
Exactly.
different this time. And that's why they are actually taking so much pain.
yes, this time, it's clear that India realized a little bit late that they crossed the line with Muslim countries. But to say that it is affecting their future business, so far we don't see many indicators in that direction. It all depends on how long these campaigns sustain from one side. The other side is to which extent also the campaigners connect this issue with the other decisions and policies Indian government is doing against Muslims, either in Kashmir or inside India. So if this issue is connected with those issues collectively, then it might affect policies towards India in the long term when it comes to public policy in the Arab
Exactly.
region. But
Haytham,
if it's only, wallahi, one event and the government of India try to control the damages or apologize or
yeah.
something like this,
Hey,
it's going to be wrapped up and business goes on.
Haytham, Haytham, if we go through the statement by BJP and BJP leaders, obviously now they are giving clarifications and they are saying that BJP is not anti-Islam party and BJP is a party that believes that everyone has a right and Muslims being part of India as well, a huge population of India. They very well know that Muslims are living in India and India being secular country, they have given the clarifications that there is nothing against Islam and BJP is a pro-Muslim party. What about the Arab countries? Are they aware of whatever is going on in India, especially when it comes to hijab crisis, especially when it comes to lynchings of Muslims who are, convicted or maybe suspected of, transporting the cows? Are they aware in the Arab world, and what do they say about it?
And also, Mr. Haytham, when we look at what the kind of reaction that we've seen from the BJP and India with the possible threat, of course, they want to avert a certain situation that they thought was possible from the Arab world. Could that also not be used to also deter India from other kinds of violations that continue to exist against the Muslim population, also particularly in Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir?
It could be if it's used politically correctly and the campaign continues. But if I go back to Mr. Raja question also, that the Arab countries are becoming more aware about what India is doing against Muslims, either in Kashmir or inside India, not because of the effective role of mainstream media, but because of social media. So in last 2 years, stories about what India is doing inside India or in Kashmir became viral in the Arab countries because of social media. And now even mainstream media is covering those news because they don't want to be behind the social media trend. So now I think a lot of Arab countries are aware of how aggressively India is violating human rights either inside India or in
All
Kashmir,
right.
which
Thank you
helps.
very much, Mr. Haytham Nasir, for joining us and being a part of the debate. Yes, Farrukh.
Right. If you permit me, I'm going to disagree with our friend Hitham, and there's a reason. I've seen many instances where people's, emotions were flared up, but you never know which event is going to cause what kind of reaction.
Right.
For example, before Bouazizi, there were people who used to kill themselves, but then one man's burning himself actually led to Arab Spring. Similarly, when you talk about this issue, usually by this time, things blow over, right? But it did not happen. Remember, this is an incident that took place by the end of the last month, and it still continues, right? It happened somewhere around 26th, 27th of May, and this is June. If there is such reaction coming, then there is guarantee that it is going to blow up further and there is going to be further pushback. The problem is that when you have a country like India, which is ruled by a party like BJP, which has stayed in power by inciting violence against Muslims and these microaggressions, it becomes a race to the bottom.
Right.
Everybody is racing to be more violent towards Muslims, and that's why the Indian Prime Minister won't be able to come out and condemn it in that way. That's why it will keep on blowing up. And given that the circumstances are such, this time because we are talking about Holy Prophet, and whatever was said on television, on live television. Right? So there is a record and it will keep on repeating, it will go viral and people will keep on reacting. The French instance was not of a video clip. It was pictures or statements that were made off the camera, but this time it is something else. Had I been an Indian, I would have made sure that all the English channels are shut down, because on such channels, they are now actually laundering hate.
Exactly. Sana, very quickly, resolution in the United Nations was passed against Islamophobia. Then a further step should have been taken by the Muslim governments, especially I think it should be made part of their constitution. Whole ummah is like a body. If one part of the body is getting hurt, the feeling should be faced by the whole body. And I think it should be part of their constitutions that whichever country is violating it.
And one sentence again. This time, this is an office bearer who has actually made these statements. Remember that it is a big thing. They might have suspended the person, they haven't expelled her, and even expulsion is not enough.
All right, we don't have time at all now. Thank you so much for watching the debate. We'll see you tomorrow.